So, you want to do some redstone in survival? Well, you've come to the right place, because I have done a lot of survival redstone in my time, and I've kind of picked up a few tips and techniques that I wanted to share with you to make your lives just a tiny bit easier. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy, because survival redstone is always a bit of a nightmare. And that is why I would always suggest starting off in creative mode. Now, this might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I can promise you that if you're designing a bespoke redstone contraption, you don't want to be designing that in survival mode where there's mobs around, you're going to be running out of resources, it's difficult to move about. You want to design all of it in creative mode, and then you want to copy the design from your creative mode world into the survival world. And the great thing about doing things in creative mode first is that you then have a good idea of how many resources you're going to need. So write out a quick list of all the things that you require, gather them up before you start building. Now, if you're building this base within some form of landscape, make sure that you actually clear out the area first. That way you will run into any hazards, such as water or lava, that could potentially destroy your redstone contraption, but more importantly, it's just really frustrating having to clear out blocks while you're trying to focus on actually building something quite complicated. And of course, the last thing that you want in your redstone contraption is a creeper, so light it up. Okay, I know that I'm a culprit for not doing this, and I mean, no matter how many years I spend playing Minecraft, I still don't seem to light up my areas, but do as I say and not as I do. Light up the space. Now, one thing that I would always advise is that you give yourself some breathing room around the redstone contraption so that you can actually move around it. So for example, all of these blocks right here are going to remain completely clear. This space is reserved for my redstone, and then also up at the top, these two blocks here are going to remain completely clear, because there's nothing more frustrating than not actually being able to access certain parts of your redstone. If it's the sort of redstone contraption that's going to take slightly longer, maybe an hour or so, I would always suggest building up some form of temporary base. Make sure that you've got a crafting bench, a furnace, some form of chest so you can store all of the redstone but also all the junk that you clear out, a bed, and if you have one, an ender chest. And of course, if you have access to shulker boxes, then make use of them. Fill one up with redstone resources, chuck it down, grab some, pick it back up. Whenever you need more, just chuck it down again, pick up some more, take it away. I mean, it's just going to make your building process so much more efficient. So, I think that's everything in terms of preparation. Now it's time to move on to the building side of things. Now, what I would always suggest when it comes to building redstone contraptions in survival mode is that you build up from the bottom. So instead of starting somewhere random and just starting on a circuit up there, I would suggest starting from the bottom and kind of working upwards in layers to the best of your ability. But with that being said, I would always suggest building in circuits instead of building block by block. Now, this might not make much sense, but what I mean is, instead of thinking, right, I've got to place a redstone torch here, and I've got to place some redstone dust there, and a lever, and then a dropper with a hopper running down into it, what you think is, okay, I'm making a falling edge monostable circuit here, so I'm going to need that redstone torch, that redstone in there, and this is going to create a falling edge monostable circuit, and then I'm going to take a comparator output from the falling edge monostable circuit and run it into the redstone contraption. Instead of thinking in terms of redstone components, try and think of how the actual system is working. When you start thinking like this, you make far fewer mistakes because you recognize them almost straight away. I would always suggest that you avoid placing redstone components on top of naturally generating blocks, things like stone, dirt, andesite and all that, simply because you'll probably forget that you've done it. You'll come to the area at a later date, maybe you're doing some mining underneath, you decide to punch upwards, and then your redstone line breaks and your redstone contraption stops working. It's never particularly fun, so I would highly suggest replacing those blocks with non-naturally generating blocks, things like stone bricks or cobblestone, just to show that you've done some work in the area and maybe you should be a little bit more cautious. Another consideration worth thinking about is that you don't use blocks affected by haste 2 when you're building redstone, because it's easy to get carried away when you're mining out things and you'll wipe out everything. Now, you may notice when I build redstone contraptions, I tend to use all different colors, and I don't just do this because it looks cool, even though it does look really cool. I do it because it allows me to separate out what circuits do what. You see, each one of these colors represents a different circuit, and when it comes to bug fixing or upgrading in the future, it's really handy to be able to work out where each one of the circuits is. Now, in survival mode, I probably wouldn't suggest using wool because it's quite expensive, but try using different blocks. For example, stone bricks for your input circuits, cobblestone for your AND gates, and a little bit of polished andesite for all of your RS NOR latches. If you're running really low on redstone resources, I'd suggest looking into some cheap alternatives to common redstone circuits. For example, this is one that I see all of the time. It is a slimeless version of a one-tick monostable circuit. So you can see this one on the left is the regular one with a sticky piston, whereas the one on the right doesn't actually require a sticky piston, which is incredibly handy at the start of a survival world. Right, I think that's all my building tips covered. Now it's time to move on to the kind of efficiency tips. Some would call them life hacks. If you're playing in Minecraft 1.14 or later, then carry your trapdoors. It will allow you to bug fix in areas that you never previously would have been able to bug fix. It's always smart to use slime blocks for scaffolding, simply because they're great for using in survival mode, as you can break them with your fist instantly. The only time that I would say you shouldn't use slime blocks for scaffolding is if your redstone contraption has lots of slime blocks in it already, because then when you're breaking your scaffolding, you're likely to break something important, and if you leave some of your scaffolding, it's also likely to break something important. In that case, I would suggest using scaffolding blocks that are significantly different from the other blocks that you're using inside your redstone circuitry. Actual scaffolding blocks do work pretty well for this. The only issue that I take is that you can't place them on top of a lot of redstone components, which makes them quite limiting. Now I want to ask you a question. What is wrong with my hotbar right now? All seems perfectly in order, all seems pretty good. No, okay? No. Never have water in your hotbar when you're working on redstone contraptions, because inevitably you're accidentally going to right click it and you're going to ruin everything. I've been there, and it hurts. What definitely should always be in your inventory is a bow. Now this is another example of do as I say and not as I do. I always seem to leave my bow at home, but it's probably the most useful thing to have when working on redstone contraptions, because if somehow a creeper spawns in there, you don't want to be getting up close to it. You want to hit that thing from range. I would argue that this could be the perfect hotbar for working on redstone. You've got your food, that's in your offhand, you've got your pickaxe for breaking things, you've got your bow for all of your attacking, then all the rest is focused on redstone. Now this may seem like an obvious one, but make sure that you utilize those angles when you're trying to place in directional redstone components. For example, I want to place a sticky piston facing across on this block. If I do it here, then it's going upwards. If I do it here, it's still going upwards. I need to go right to the edge, then I need to go right on that edge, and then it will go in exactly how I like it. Ender pearls are always useful things to have when working on redstone contraptions, just to get you out of some of those sticky situations. And if you get yourself really stuck, I mean truly stuck, then chorus fruit is also always a good option, because, well, you never know where you're going to end up. I would also always suggest having these things in your inventory: a crafting bench, and then all of the raw materials, things like stone, wood, cobblestone, iron, and redstone blocks that you can then convert into redstone dust, and if you're really going for it, have some spare quartz in there too. If you're ever working on a redstone contraption that involves TNT or crammed minecarts, then leave those until the end. Do everything and then install those things, because otherwise your TNT is going to go off by accident and your minecarts are... I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting them to go out all over the place, not just jet off into the distance. For anyone who has ever had to place long redstone lines, you will know how boring it is having to count them out. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Repeater. You get the drill. Not particularly exciting. Imagine that many times over. What I would always suggest doing is placing a power source at the end, and then all you have to do is place in the redstone until it stops being powered, and then you know, well, I need a repeater there, and then you just repeat that process. Anyway, time to move on to some slightly more technical life hacks. If you're working on a slightly temperamental or very complicated redstone system that fits within a 16 by 16 area, I would always suggest building it within one chunk. That way, when you unload the chunks, the entire redstone system will be unloaded all at once. Whereas if you build it on a chunk boundary, then that means that half of the redstone system is going to unload before the other half, which could potentially cause some problems. Oh, and the way that you get those chunk boundaries up is you just press F3 and G. Now, I'm about to say something very controversial here, so brace yourselves, but sometimes compactness isn't always best. Take this thing for example. It looks absolutely awesome. Seriously cool. Nice square edges, just redstone all over the place, everything super compact and all just knitting in together. I love the way that it looks, but would I want to build it in survival mode? No, I wouldn't. It would be a nightmare. It's just so difficult to get around and see what's going wrong. So if you have plenty of space, then go for a slightly less compact build. Give yourself plenty of breathing room to allow access to certain hard to reach areas. But with that being said, if you don't have much space, then compact away. Build ridiculous circuit boards like this one. Try and be at least a little bit wary of not creating tons of lag for yourself, or if you're playing on a server, for the other members of the server. Now by this, I don't mean limit your redstone contraptions, but just try and be smart. Don't create redstone clocks that run at all times. Try your best to reduce the number of lighting updates, and wherever possible, reduce the amount of redstone dust that you're using. Now I'm not saying that you pull a little mango and make all of your redstone contraptions look like train stations, but just, you know, keep it down a little bit. And I understand that this is hilarious advice coming from the person that has crashed the Hermitcraft server on multiple occasions due to my very laggy redstone contraptions. Now if you're running really long redstone lines, then it's probably good to start questioning whether or not they're actually going to remain loaded while you're using the redstone contraptions. You see, there's a loaded area around the player, and if a redstone signal goes outside of the loaded area, it just stops. It doesn't continue into the unloaded area, it just gets cut off. It's a problem that we've hit on a number of occasions on some of the more ambitious projects on the Hermitcraft server. And the last piece of advice that I want to give for today's video is don't panic. I know it can be very daunting when you're trying to start up a new redstone project in survival. Even me, someone that's been building redstone projects for years, still gets a little bit scared when I take on a new challenge. But you just have to prepare for it. You have to make sure that you have everything in place to make your life as easy as possible. And then once you get going, you're fine. It's just, it's getting started that is the tricky part. So make sure that you follow the steps that I've mentioned in this video, and it will be all plain sailing. Anyway, I think that just about wraps things up for today's video. If you have any extra tips, then chuck them down in the comment section. But I hope that you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya!